Previously on Fear Noir. My name is Travis Ellison. I've operated as a private detective in the city of Night's Fall for years, dealing with lowlives, thugs, and organized crime. Recently, however, there have been strange goings-on in the city, with a decidedly supernatural flavor. It started with the Melody Hales case, a young woman I found eating the dead at Craven's Cemetery. Then there was the disappearance of one of my old drinking buddies, a war veteran by the name of Tommy Hannigan. He vanished without a trace. I was subsequently hired by Tommy's granddaughter, Debbie Rodriguez, who wanted me to find out what had happened to him. This led me to Tommy's apartment, where I discovered an old photograph of his squad during Vietnam. On the rear of the photograph were the words, "Demanda's Devils," followed by the cryptic phrase, "Crimson Orchid." I then found some notes and letters Tommy had hidden. However, while trying to retrieve them, I was attacked by a tall, powerful man with cuts and stitches across his face and hands. The resulting confrontation ended with me in the hospital and my attacker being impaled on an old iron railing. Soon, the true horror of the situation was revealed to me. I was informed by Detective Jim Myers that the man with the torn face was alive and well, and still out there.
As the sun settles down, we are lost with no lights on, to the place where we drown, beneath the horizon. Forewarned you are in fear noir.
For once, it isn't raining. At least I can't hear it against my room window. I'd say things were looking up, but I'm currently waiting to be discharged from Night's Fall General Hospital after weeks of being here. Each of the last 3 days, they've said the same thing. "Just one more day, Mr. Ellison." Apparently they aren't happy with my numbers, whatever that means. I must admit, I don't exactly feel fine. My ankle is still healing and heavily strapped up, as is my wrist, but at least the swelling has subsided from my ribs after the fall. Walking is painful, but I can at least do it now without a crutch. I've been thinking a lot about the past recently. When you spend this amount of time in a hospital room, your memories climb out of a pit in the back of your mind to haunt you. I had a therapist once, but that didn't last long. He said I had unresolved issues from my childhood. I thought that was a crock, but since my fall, I've been thinking more and more about it. Kinda feels like I've shaken something loose. Maybe I'll stop thinking about these things when I get back to the office. I've got too much time on my hands here, and no booze to drown the most jagged of memories. Staring at these 4 blank walls would have been enough to drive me mad these last few weeks. But I've had some visitors to subdue the monotony at times. Detective Jim Myers has dropped by with his inane baseball chat, while Debbie Rodriguez has been something of a Florence Nightingale. She's taken it upon herself to look after me. At first, I found her unfaltering optimism and care annoying, but after a while you get accustomed to those sorts of things, I suppose. She has a kind smile and, well, let's just leave it at that. I think she feels bad because all of this happened to me while searching for her grandfather. There are still no leads on his whereabouts, and even if there were, I'm stuck here. It's as if old Tommy Hannigan was abducted by aliens plucked into the ether. Normally I'd assume the real explanation was more mundane than that, but not now. And I've had plenty of time to think and to piece some things together. As I've done so, there's been a horrible foreboding growing in my mind. It reminds me of something that happened when I was a kid, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever is in store for me, it's just as dangerous. Whoever sent the man with the torn face to Tommy's apartment, they wanted those letters he'd hidden in the photo frame. And I can see why. They contain intriguing information that Tommy had collated over the years. While much of it is in English, some of it is clearly in code, including some strange symbols I don't recognize. I've tried my best to decode them, but the messages seem to use differing ciphers, so when I work out one message, the same technique cannot be applied to the others. It's quite a pickle, as my grandmother used to say. I think I'm at the end of the road with it. In a day or two, I'll share the papers with Jim Myers, but I know he'll take them into evidence. The papers themselves also have some strange stained markings through them, and I suspect that some kind of disappearing ink has been used that I'm not familiar with. While I can copy the visible messages verbatim, a big piece of the puzzle would be lost without the originals in my possession. At some point, however, I have to admit defeat and see what others make of it. Except for the notes, the papers include several letters between Tommy and his old war buddies, particularly revolving around the 12-man squad he served with during the war. Demanda's Devils, as they called themselves. Something happened out in Vietnam where they were... Ah, great. Another doctor, probably here to tell me I'm staying for yet another day. I don't feel like saying come in, so I don't. The door opens to my room in any case, but it's not someone from the hospital. In steps the well-dressed figure of Detective Jim Myers, with his tanned raincoat over his arm and his black hair in a neat side shed as usual, but he doesn't have his patented sardonic grin. The absence of that makes me cautious. How are you doing, Travis? He always asks this when dropping by, but today he's got a different look to him. He usually appears younger than the 45 years he's spent breathing air, but today his age looks to be catching up with him. There is a darkness to his eyes, like he's lost sleep and is yet to find it. He attempts a smile, and it's as though he's working through the pleasantries to get to a carefully planted bombshell. I'm fine, I answer. I just want to get out of here and back to the office. I'm sure the landlord for the building is circling to evict me. Debbie's spoken to him already, and he agreed to give me a little more time, but that runs out tomorrow. I need to get to work. Debbie offered up some of her own wages from her waitressing gig. Can you believe that? But I said no. Yeah, she's a good one, Jim offers. He looks down at his shoes for a moment, as though they'll give him the answer to whatever problem is running through his procedural mind. I wait. There is silence between us. As usual, I'm the one to break it. You don't expect your shoes to talk, do you, Jim? No, he replies. I don't suppose I do. Spit it out, Jim. What's happened? That's when he tells me the news. I listen to his words and try to hide the dread I feel in my bones. My worst suspicions are coming true. You see, each night as I've slept in this hospital room for the last few weeks, I've never been able to settle, not completely. I keep thinking back to that man covered in scars and stitches, his grip around my throat, the fall, and then his body impaled on the fence, me lying on the ground next to him in broken pieces. When the hospital ward grows quieter at night, I hear footsteps occasionally on the hallway outside. Footsteps do strange things in hospitals. They both thud and echo on the hard floors, and each time I hear them, a shiver runs up my back. I'm not sure why. I'm not really sure of anything at the moment. I mean, I was certain my attacker was dead until Jim told me otherwise. No one should survive being impaled like that. But apparently the dead walking around is something I have to get used to, and real quick. Travis, are you listening to anything I'm saying? Jim seems annoyed at me being lost in thought. Sometimes I prefer my thoughts to the conversation of others, I say, especially when they bring bad news to my door. Jim then tells me that the fears that have consumed me in the wee small hours of night on the ward might as well be real because they foreshadow what is coming. He tells me that the man with the torn face has indeed made a reappearance. He's been seen in the vicinity of the hospital the last few nights, lumbering around. Last night there was an altercation. A nurse said she was being followed in the parking lot while joining the night shift. She saw a strange, hulking man with wounds on his face moving between the parked cars, using the shadows to obscure himself. He was heading straight for her with his arms outstretched. The nurse did the only thing she could. She ran. Luckily, she made it into the lobby of the hospital before her pursuer could get his hands on her. 2 police officers soon investigated the parking lot, and both ended up in the hospital worse than me. A hunch brews in my mind. Jim, has the nurse served on my ward? He nods. It's Marcia. I know the name immediately. I'm on first-name terms with her. Marcia has helped me greatly with my recovery, always checking in each day. I start to think that the man with the torn face can somehow tell who's been near me, picking up the scent like a dog or a hunter. It's a crazy thought, but isn't crazy everywhere these days? I ask if Marcia is okay. Thankfully, Jim says she is, before giving me the details of what happened to the police officers who confronted the assailant in the parking lot. Jim rubs his brow with his hand in worried fashion before continuing. One of the men, O'Hara, a really great guy, he has a broken back. They say he might never walk again. I'm sorry to hear that. Sitting down in a chair in the corner of the room, Detective Jim Myers looks like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. That bastard did it with his bare hands, Travis. How is that even possible? He looks to me as though I have the answers. File it under strange days, I tell him. What do you mean? He asks. I saw that man's injuries when he fell on the railing, Jim. No one survives that, and yet here he is, snooping around the hospital grounds at night where I'm being kept. And then there's what happened at Craven's cemetery. Jim gives me a puzzled look. I explain to him about the thing in the tomb and what happened to Melody Hales. Any other time I would have called you crazy. Jim looks around nervously as he says this, but I don't know. There have been a few strange calls coming into the station lately. Maybe it's the end of times, I laugh, moving uncomfortably in my bed. If it is, I hope they hurry up, put this damned city out of its misery. Then there is another silence in the room. I can feel that Jim wants to say something else to me. Something that will make me more uncomfortable than any hospital bed. This time he, uncharacteristically, speaks first. Travis, he says, his voice as grim as his words. We want to catch this guy and put an end to all of this. It's personal now. I've been given the go-ahead by my superiors. Would you consider... I'm not playing bait, I snap. I felt that man's grip around my throat, remember? That's enough to put anyone off a repeat performance. We think he might try again tonight, Travis. And if you're here, maybe he'll... I'm not doing it, Jim. No way. And then the emotional blackmail comes, yes. He went after Debbie Rodriguez last night, too, he says. I feel a horrible sense of anxiety in my stomach. God damn it, Travis, you're starting to care about that girl. Her kindness, her sweet smile. I feel myself stammering. Is she, Oh, she's fine, the detective says. She was staying at a friend's house that night, thankfully, but most of her belongings were torn to pieces when we turned up, and the building superintendent saw the perp. He described him as being over 6.5 feet tall and having deep cuts all over his face. It's easy to put 2 and 2 together here. Yeah, that's fine detective work, Jim, I say sarcastically. You boys have really outdone yourselves, Jim ignores my barbs. What's this guy want, Travis? What is he looking for? Well, beats me, I offer. But when I think about the letters and notes I found that night at Tommy Hannigan's, I know something bigger is at play. But I refuse to give them up, not until later, at least. I'm sure the cops will take them from me, and there's still more to glean from them, I'm certain. The thought crosses my mind that maybe I can get a friend to test the paper for chemicals at the university lab. Yeah, that could work. That might show if there's invisible ink on the pages, and then I'll hand them over to the cops. Travis, what is it with you zoning out on me? Jim is sounding increasingly annoyed. He is right. My focus has been all over the place since the fall, thinking of the past and of what's on the horizon. Both feel bleak at the moment. I tell him I'm fine, but Jim gives me a look and clearly doesn't believe that I've told him everything. He'd have to prove it, though, and even if he suspected I was holding on to something I found at Tommy's, I doubt he'd get permission to search me or my room on just a hunch. So, are you in or not, Travis? I'm about to say no, yet again, when Jim plays his strongest card. If we don't stop this guy... well, I'd hate to think what will happen to Debbie if he finds her. And so, that's how it happens. I can't walk without pain in my ankle. My hands are still in bad shape, and yet I find myself agreeing to be the bait tonight. Jim asks me to put my faith in him and his officers. I tell him that faith is hard to come by these days. No, instead, it looks like tonight I'm dancing with Lady Luck. The sun has set, and my surroundings are now as hushed as the bleak darkness outside. I suppose this place has to be quiet. The long corridors are dimly lit, and the air is colder than the rest of the hospital, but it's the stillness that unnerves me. These last few weeks I've been used to hearing the company of nurses and doctors busying themselves outside of my room on the ward. Where I now wait is the antithesis of that. There is a staleness to the silence, like it's rotten and needs to be discarded. By what? Only time will tell. This is the calm before the storm. I know it. It seems that Detective Jim Myers has friends up in high places. For our little plan, he's managed to wrangle us exclusive use of this place, the 11th floor of Knight's Fall General. It seems reckless to me, inviting something malevolent to a hospital, a place where people should be safe and secure. But Jim is certain it's our best shot, as my stalker clearly knows I'm here. Besides, it's a hell of a lot more preferential to being alone at my office. The 11th floor used to have wards like any other, but in recent years it's been used for administrative purposes, mainly storing medical records and old equipment that the hospital doesn't quite know what to do with yet. They've put it in the hospital records and made it widely known that I've been moved here. Jim suspects that the man with the torn face is being fed information about my whereabouts, but I don't know. I have this uncanny feeling that somehow he can tune in to where I am. For the last hour I've been waiting for something to happen, stuck here like a worm on a hook in this gloomy room on the 11th floor. It's an old hospital room. There is a bed, but several boxes are stacked on it, and 2 chairs, one covered in a bundle of yellowing papers. No expense spared to make me comfortable. The light above looks like it could fizzle out at any moment, and there's a musty smell that only comes with old paper and damp. It's certainly not a place for a patient or a last stand. I'm dressed in clothes Debbie brought me from the office earlier. She gave me a big hug when we parted. God, I hope she's safe. As per my request, I've been allowed to carry my old Smith & Wesson 442 revolver. It sits snug in its shoulder holster, loaded with 6 shots. I hope I won't have to use them, because that will mean the plan has failed. Finally, there's some noise outside. I hear laughter coming along the corridor and wise-cracking voices, which can only be Jim and some of his officers from the station.
Are you decent?
Jim jokes from the other side of the door. Come in before I change my mind. Jim enters. With him are a man and a woman, both in plain clothes, but I can tell they're cops. Even so, they look too young for this sort of detail. I thought you'd have your best with you, Jim. Jim frowns at the question. Well, these are my best, Travis. The 2 best shots in the department. This is Walker and Hassan. With his pale complexion, red hair, and freckles, Walker looks like he's 1 size too small for his suit and coat. He has a youthful gleam in his eye and matching smile on his face. That common concoction of early 20s bravado and not having seen enough of the world to know it'll swallow you up, no matter how confident you are. Hassan has the same innocent smile as Walker, but with a little more steel in her brown eyes. Her arms are behind her back, like she's standing to attention in the army, her long black hair tied in a ponytail. At least she's dressed for the surroundings, wearing a doctor's blue scrubs. Well, you 2 barely look like you're out of diapers, but if Jim says you're that good... We are, Walker says. Hassan nods in agreement. No need to be nervous, Mr. Ellison. We'll end this creep before he gets anywhere near you. I admire their optimism, though I don't share it. The plan is a simple one. A police decoy dressed in Debbie Rodriguez's clothes will wait out in the parking lot. If our friend with the torn face makes an appearance, she'll quickly head for a stairwell at the side of the hospital. There, 12 officers will be waiting for him, armed to the teeth. If he makes it past them, the decoy will head up the stairwell to the 11th floor, hoping her pursuer will follow. That's where some more officers will be positioned at the top of the stairs. If he gets past them, then it's Walker and Hassan left to take him down. After that, well, it's just me, my revolver, and trying to avoid being thrown headfirst through a window to my death again. Where is Debbie? I ask. Oh, she's safe, Jim says. We're keeping her at one of our stations. You'd need an army to get her out of there, so don't worry about her. It's not her I'm worried about. A buzz comes over Jim's radio. I hear a garbled voice say something about positions. He responds. Tell Davis he should be at the stairs with the others, he says to his crackling radio. No, not out front. Inside the hallway at the foot of the stairs. We don't want to scare this creep off. Shoot on sight. Jesus, we aren't a firing squad. Now, give the perp a warning first. Tase him if you can. I want answers from this guy. Yes, if nothing else works, drop him. Over and out. Jim sighs loudly. Problems? I joke. You know, we could ask the cast of Police Academy to take over, if that would make this operation run more smoothly. They're just spooked, Jim says, moving some papers off one of the old hospital chairs and sitting down. After what happened to you and then Officer O'Hara, there are a lot of whispers doing the rounds that this guy isn't human. Oh, he's human, all right, I say. But I would be lying if I told you I understood how he's still walking around. His face, though, well, he's no stranger to violence, I'll tell you that. Jim's radio buzzes again. I hear another distorted voice over it say something about movement in the parking lot outside. I look at Jim, and he looks at me. I can tell we're both apprehensive. I don't know why I'm so nervous, he says. That's because you know. This is different from anything you've encountered before, Jim. He asks me what I mean by that, though I can tell from his voice that he knows precisely what I'm talking about. The strange, Jim. The boogeyman under your bed, the ghoul in the graveyard. The feeling that something isn't right. That there's a darkness creeping into our lives, into this city, and you can't stop it. Jim grins at me and says, well, aren't you a barrel of laughs? He's been saying something similar to me these last, 10 years, even when I first met him during a homicide case on the north side. Just me and him, talking over a case. I've always been the cynical one out of the two of us, but when it comes to recent events, well, maybe I'm becoming the believer. Travis, he says, you don't seriously think that there's something, supernatural going on here, do you? I don't know, I say, but there's a feeling about all of this, and I've had it before. A long, long time ago. It reminds me of something that happened to me when I was a kid. Oh, don't tell me you're getting all nostalgic in your old age, Travis. Jim, I've been in this hospital for weeks. When you're staring at four walls every hour of every day, you start to think things over. About the world around you, and about the past, too. What's been happening recently, it has an eerie feeling to it that I've met before. Like I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and under the water there is something far more malevolent waiting for me, for all of us. Oh, don't tell me you met Elvis's ghost once. He was looking for a peanut butter and banana sandwich, huh? Jim mocks me, but I don't rise to it. I ignore the joke by telling him something about my past. I don't know why, but this seems like the time to tell it as we wait for the inevitable to happen. I begin with, Jim, I grew up in a place called Wyndham. I know it, he says. Nice town, quiet, about 3 hours drive from here. Yeah, I answer. It's a nice place on the surface, but it's got a lot of bad memories for me, and what's going on here has the same dread to it. I was 11 years old at the time. walking home from school. It was about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. The sun was out. Me and a friend of mine, Max, we had this little hideout we'd built in the woods on the outskirts of town. You know, a wooden tree house, a tire swing over a small creek. Now that's adorable, Jim says, laughing again. I wish it had been, I reply. But there was nothing about what happened that day that could make me smile. We hadn't been to our hideout for a week or so, and we were excited. Max had a new penknife he wanted to try out. He used to carve messages into the trees around the area in case we ever got lost, symbols only he and I would understand. I thought it was a stupid idea, but I humored him. Even then I was cynical, but not as cynical as I would become. Max was less like that. He was the adventurous type, a good friend. That day I was more excited about the comics I'd stashed in a box in the treehouse. My great-uncle Carl had sent them to me from the UK. I'd opened them before my folks could get their hands on them. The New Eagle, they were called. A kind of science fiction horror comic. They were great, but my family was dead set against that sort of thing. They thought that stuff would pervert my mind. I think they worried I'd end up like Uncle Carl, off chasing shadows. Jim's radio bursts into life again before the chatter falls back to an unnerving static. It sounds like the officers down in the stairwell are getting nervous. The decoy standing in the parking lot is starting to have second thoughts. Apparently she's hearing things down there. I can feel the anticipation, the emptiness building to an unseen end. Turning his attention away from the radio, Jim asks, "So, what's this got to do with our friend with the torn-up face?" Well, this has the same feeling, Jim. You see, Max and I headed to the treehouse by the creek, but when we got there and came through the pine trees to our spot, we froze. I saw the pink jacket first. I guess it took me a moment to know that I was staring at a young girl's body. She was lying face down in the creek. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Oh, that must have been terrible, Jim says, shuffling around in his seat, now clearly feeling guilty for making jokes. It was. I continue. I'd never seen a dead body before. I felt myself walking down the depression to the creek in a daze, and that's when I saw her eye staring at me, empty and lifeless from between strands of muddied blonde hair. What happened after that? Well, Max and I ran back to town once we realized the girl was dead. This was before cell phones, of course. The local sheriff, he went over there straight away, and before we knew it, the area was buzzing with cops. What always hit me most about that girl is that she was never identified. It was a complete mystery. I mean, someone should have reported her missing. The town had a funeral for the girl with no name, and they buried her in Wyndham Cemetery. Ah, that's rough. Didn't they ever run DNA on her? Jim asks. I don't know, Jim. But that wasn't the worst of it, no. That came the following winter. There's an old quarry that's filled up on the outskirts of town. A few other friends, Max and I, went to it one January because we'd heard the whole thing had iced right up like a giant glass walkway. At least that's what Max thought of it. He thought it was a good idea to walk out across it. I guess we all did, as a group. I was excited about heading out onto it just for the thrill of standing there, looking down through the frozen ice at the black depths below. But something unusual happened just as I was about to step foot on the ice. I felt this overpowering urge to stay put, to keep my feet on the rocky shore. I couldn't explain it then, and I can't now, but somehow I knew I would die if I walked on that ice. Probably just nerves, Jim says. I wouldn't have done it either. No, I say, looking at the doorway to the corridor outside. I wasn't the type to get scared, not back then. I never said a word about how I felt for fear of looking weak. I just said I didn't want to do it. Max and the others went on, but I stayed put. They laughed and busted my balls like we always did with each other, but then, once they were out on it by a good distance, the ice, it cracked beneath their feet. I'll never forget that sound, like something hideous in the depths, groaning, ready to swallow my friends up whole. Max fell into the freezing water as the ice broke up beneath him and the current took him away from the surface. He was trapped under the ice. My other friends scrambled back to the shore. I wanted to help, but I couldn't. I'm ashamed to say that I was frozen to the spot, filled with dread. I heard him, poor Max, thumping from under the ice somewhere down in the darkness, banging his fists up against it, desperately trying to find a way out. Then the banging slowed and finally stopped. We all knew we knew our friend had drowned. But you see, Jim, just as the banging ceased, I looked out across the quarry, and I swear I saw a girl dressed in a pink raincoat staring at me. The murdered girl from the creek. She was out there on the ice, too. How? I don't know. No one else saw her, but I did. Over the years, I've discounted what I saw as the product of anxiety, stress, fear, guilt, whatever you want to call it. But the feeling I had looking at the girl in the pink raincoat out there across the way, it filled me with a terror I can't quite explain. Like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. Now, ever since I went to that tomb at Craven's Cemetery and found Melody Hales eating a body buried there, I've had this feeling inside. The same feeling I had out there at the ice. Like I'm being warned. Something is telling me, look the other way. And it only got worse when I encountered the man with the torn face. And it's been growing each and every day in this hospital. The same feeling that stopped me from walking out on that frozen lake. But this time, Jim, this time, I'm not going to listen to it. Jim's radio bursts into life. A voice says, "We've got movement in the parking lot. He's here." I feel a cold dread wash over me, and I instinctively touch my gun in its holster. Jim looks across at me. "Well, it's game time," he says. Standing up, he opens the door to the cold, dim corridor outside. He turns and takes one look at me. "Now don't worry, Travis, we'll get this creep before he gets you." And then he's gone. A few minutes later, I stick my head out of the doorway. Walker and Hassan are standing guarding the entrance to my room. "Everything okay, sir?" Hassan asks. Yeah, just making sure you're both still here." "We won't get past us, sir," Walker offers confidently. I head back into the room and close the door. Looking out between the blinds at the window, I can see the darkened streets below. I'm too high up and it's too dimly lit to see what's going on down there. Besides, the side entrance the decoy is supposed to run for is around the corner. If only I could see what's going on. Now it's just a waiting game. I hear Walker and Hassan's radios buzz a few times, and now I wish I'd asked Jim for one so I could keep tabs on what's happening. Reaching inside my coat, I feel for the slit where I hide things. Inside, the papers from Tommy Hannigan's remain safe. I move some boxes and then lay the papers out on the hospital bed in front of me. I start to feel bad. The writing is accusatory. It stares up at me and says, "You should have told Jim what you know." I'll do that soon. I tell myself I'll get the letters tested for invisible ink at a lab tomorrow, if any of us see the next day. Then I grab my cell phone and I quickly take some photos of the letters so I have a copy. After that, I fold them back up and put them inside my coat again. I wait another 15 minutes, checking my holster repeatedly as I do so. I'd pace up and down if my ankle weren't so painful. I keep thinking about what I did tell Jim. He'll think I've gone mad, but the feeling of dread and death I had as a kid on that icy quarry, looking out across the way to the ghostly figure of the young girl in the pink raincoat, Well, it's growing again. I close my eyes and I see the little girl in my mind laying face down in the creek, her once innocent eye staring at me through mud-covered locks of golden hair. And now my thoughts turn to Max, drowning in frozen water under the ice. I shake the images, as I always have. They've haunted me my entire life, but I can't let them preoccupy me. There is too much at stake. We've got to stop this thing before he gets anywhere near Debbie, and I have to be sharp. Time is moving all too slowly. Opening the door to my room, I stick my head out and speak with Hassan and Walker again. I ask them if there's any news. It was a false alarm, they tell me. Just a hospital porter coming onto the night shift. No sign of the man with the torn face just yet. I go back into my room and... wait, I think I can hear something. Yes, a new sound. It's like a thudding somewhere in the building. What is it? I check with Hassan and Walker again. They hear it too, but Walker dismisses it as old heating pipes running through this part of the building. I'm not so sure. That feeling of dread washes over me again. The sound continues, but it's growing louder. I ask Walker and Hassan to check the rooms on either side of me. They do, and report back with nothing. I ask them to check in with Jim back at the stairwell, but he says they haven't seen or heard anything either. Walker and Hassan tell me not to stress, but I can't help it. I go back into my room. I can't sit still. The thudding noise is coming from somewhere, and in my mind it's growing fast. And with it comes a palpable feeling that I have to get the hell out of here. Just as that thought comes to me, I turn and see something out of the corner of my eye. Something is moving. A subtle change to the room. The blinds are swaying with each muffled thud. The movement is almost mesmerizing, and as I stare at them, I barely... Hassan! Walker, there's something at the window! I grab my gun from its holster. A loud smash bellows across the room as shattered glass rains across me. I fall backwards, losing my footing. Hassan and Walker burst through the door, and I can see their inexperience show. Instead of acting, they stand there for a moment like they can't believe what they're seeing. A tall, bulky figure dressed in black is climbing through the broken window from outside. His hands are getting cut on large shards of glass poking out of the window frame, but he doesn't even wince at that. And why should he? It's just another couple of cuts on a face and pair of hands covered in black stitches and congealed blood. "Stop!" Walker shouts, pointing his gun at the invader. I'm not waiting for them to act. From the floor, I pull the trigger of my revolver, putting one in the man's chest. But it might as well have been a handshake. "Stop!" Walker yells again, still not having fired. "I don't think he's listening, Walker," I shout as I get to my feet, my ankle throbbing with pain. "Open fire, for God's sake!" Finally, Hassan and Walker catch on. This guy, this thing, coming in through the window isn't going to stop. He'll keep on going until he gets what he wants. And the only person he has business with is me. They open fire. But the man barely flinches. He's now through the window, and for the first time I see that he's carrying something behind him with one hand. It looks like an old worn sack of some kind, large and heavy. "Get out!" I yell at Walker and Hassan as I retreat back through the doorway. Walker is practically frozen to the spot, but Hassan pulls him to the side before the man with the torn face gets his hands on him. We run down the corridor, me limping badly, as several heavily armed cops head towards us from the stairwell, Jim leading the charge. "What the hell is happening?" Jim shouts above the noise. "Oh, our friend is here, in my room," I say, "and apparently he's Father Christmas." That's when our pursuer appears from the doorway back along the corridor, dragging the large sack behind him on the floor. "Freeze!" Jim shouts, with his officers next to him. "It won't work, Jim." He responds with a loud, booming command. "Open fire!" A hail of bullets sprays across the man's body, some of them splintering wood and plaster from the walls. The man lets go of the sack behind him, stops for a moment, and bows his head. My ears are ringing from the sound, but I hope this is him having second thoughts. Once the shooting stops, we wait for a response. But this man hasn't dropped to the ground like any normal human being. No, he looks up, and though blood is pouring from several wounds across his chest, arms, and legs, even one in his cheek, he just grins at us all with blackened teeth. It's the same foul grin he gave before launching me through the window back at old Tommy's. I've spent weeks in a hospital bed since then. I'm not in any hurry to tangle with him again. I've got to get out of here. Another volley of shots. This time he leaves the sack behind on the floor and moves forward. Though his movements seem slow, they are powerful. He swings his arms at one of the cops, launching her against the hospital wall. Plaster breaks, and a light fitting falls on top of the cop as she lies motionless on the floor. She gasps in pain. "Back off to the stairwell," Jim orders. He reaches out and pulls the motionless body of the officer on the ground up and onto his shoulder, carrying her while evading the brute's clutches only by the thinnest of margins. We move as one along the corridor, and as we do, the lumbering wrecking ball that is the man with the torn face continues towards us. "How do we stop this guy?" one of the cops says, panicked. Jim stops and grabs something from his belt. He points it at our attacker. There is a clicking noise, and I watch as a dart connected to a wire fires from what he has in his hand. It's a taser, but just like the bullets, the taser does very little. It smokes and flames on the man's torn-up skin as it delivers an electric shock that would incapacitate most. It's no use. Jim has to drop it and fall back with the rest of us. The man now follows, this time at speed. His thundering footsteps clunk against the solid floor of the hospital corridor. Two cops get within his reach. I hear a loud snap as one of their arms is broken at the elbow, and the other cop is thumped onto the floor. "Jim, look out!" I yell, but it's too late. He has my friend in his grip. He lifts Jim up off the ground by his throat with one hand, while several police officers are batted away like flies with the other. I ready my revolver, but I know it won't do any good. I see Jim losing consciousness, unable to breathe, and I think of poor little Max beneath the ice. "Wait!" I shout, putting my hand into my pocket and then pulling out Tommy Hannigan's hidden papers. "You want these, or you want me? Huh? Whatever. Let him down, you can have both." The grin on the man's face is hideously evil, and I notice that the smile is so wide this time that some of the stitching on his skin is coming away. Droplets of black, congealed blood form from the wounds and dribble down his chin. "Stand back, everyone!" I shout. Most of the cops retreat further along the hallway, battered and bruised, but Hassan and Walker stay with us, their guns trained on our attacker. He still has Jim in his grasp. "Put him down, please," I say softly, stepping closer and waving the papers in front of him. The brute nods and drops Jim to the floor. I hear my friend gasping for air, but at least he's alive. Slowly, the man with the torn-up face walks towards me. Each step practically shakes the floor around him. He then stops in front of me. I stare up at him, only inches from his bloodied face. It feels like he's taller than before. Reaching out with his hand, I expect him to snap my neck. But instead, he takes old Tommy's papers from my grasp, turns, and then runs down the hallway at speed before disappearing back into the room where he first appeared. I can hear the thudding sound again, and this tells me that he's climbing back along the face of the building, making his escape to God knows where he came from. Leaning down, I prop Jim up against a wall. He sits there on the floor, rubbing his neck. His voice sounds hoarse, but he assures me he's okay, and as Hassan and Walker help him back to the stairwell to be seen by a doctor, I'm certain I hear him whisper the words, "Thank you, Travis." As he disappears, his radio buzzes into life once more, but I don't quite make out what was said. There must be something important in the message. As Hassan and Walker hand Jim off to their colleagues before turning and walking back towards me, they look ashen. Something is very wrong. What is it? I ask. Hassan tells me in a somber tone. There was an attack on Debbie Rodriguez at the station earlier. She was taken. There is a sinking feeling in my chest, and that's when I see it back along the corridor. The sack. The old worn sack the man with the torn face had carried with him. It's lying on the floor. I walk over to it. My breathing is staggered. My heart races. Please, God, don't let it be. My hand trembles as I open the sack and I see an eye staring back at me through strands of hair, just like the girl in the creek. History is repeating itself. No, please. No. Then the eye blinks. She's... Someone, help! Please, get a doctor! Carefully, I pull back the sack to reveal Debbie curled up in a fetal position. She's gagged, she's tied up, but she's alive. Thank God she's alive. It's 2 days now since the fight at the hospital. We are, of all places, now back at my office. The same leaking, dingy place where I both work and sleep. It's my world, I suppose. It is good to be back, sitting behind my desk. The bills are mounting, and I have no clients to speak of, but hopefully some work will come along soon enough. Debbie sits on the red couch. Her wrists are still bruised, but she's shown remarkable fortitude. She may be gentle, but her optimism pours cold water on even the deepest of burns. Jim stands by the window, looking down at the street below. His voice is still a little rough, but there's no permanent damage. "This neighborhood is delightful," he says. "Well, it's not the greatest, but it's home, Jim. At least the only one I can afford." Debbie laughs. "You can barely afford that." Turning from the window, Jim stares at me with suspicion. Why did you ask us here, Travis?" "Because I haven't been entirely truthful with both of you. I know more about your grandfather's disappearance than I've let on, Debbie." Debbie leans forward on the couch. "What have you been keeping from me, Travis?" It's the first time I've ever heard her annoyed. "The night I was at old Tommy's apartment, I found something. Some photographs that led me to a few letters and notes he had hidden away. I knew Jim would put it into evidence, so I held on to it to try and figure out what was happening." Jim sighs. "I knew you were holding out on me. Damn it, Travis. But the sad thing is, I'm not surprised. So these papers, is that what you gave the man back at the hospital?" I nod. "Yeah, the papers consisted of cryptic correspondence between Tommy and his old war buddies, and some other notes old Tommy seems to have put together. Some of it is in English, but other parts are covered in a bunch of strange symbols and codes. I suspect there was a chemical on the paper, too, like a disappearing ink that can only be revealed using another chemical agent. Unfortunately, we'll never know now. As for the visible code, I haven't broken all of it yet, but I know a little about cryptography, and what I can gather so far is that your grandfather, Debbie, was involved in something back during the war. His commanding officer, Demanda, was involved too. The entire squad did something back in Vietnam, and they owed a debt because of it. That debt is to something called the Crimson Orchid. Now, even after all these years, the debt is finally being paid. Over the last couple of years, members of your father's squad have gone missing, and all of them under suspicious or unusual circumstances. Tommy is the latest one to disappear. I didn't want to tell you until I knew more about it, Debbie, but you need to prepare yourself. Your grandfather might have been involved in something really bad in the past. You think he's dead, don't you? Debbie's voice is trembling. She's held out hope all this time, but I try to keep that door open for her, even if it seems unlikely that Tommy is still breathing. I don't know if he's alive or not, but those letters clearly contained important information, I say. For some reason, your kidnapper came back for them and found me while I was snooping around your grandfather's apartment. Then, after our fall from the building, he came back to the hospital. I thought it was maybe for revenge, but then I suspected he wanted the papers. I took some photographs of them, so we at least have a shot at uncovering more information. And then we'll find my grandfather? Asks Debbie. My mind is consumed by doubt, but I hide it. After everything Debbie has been through, she deserves some answers, but she also deserves a good outcome. I swear, Debbie, I'll find out what happened to Tommy. I wish you'd told me about the letters, Travis, Jim says. I could have passed them on to the FBI, had their code breakers look at it. Sorry, Jim. You know how I operate. Yeah, Jim replies. Recklessly. Will you at least send me copies of the photos you took? Yeah, sure. So, what now? Debbie asks. I was able to decode a few mentions of a place in the woods. Maybe a lodge or something? Did your grandfather ever mention anything about a cabin that he and his buddies used? Yes, she says. They would go on a fishing trip there each year. It's in a small town a few hours' drive from here. Oh, what's the name of it? Wyndham. Yeah, that's it. I can see Jim looking at me. I can tell he recognizes the name, and I think he can see that the color is drained from my face at the mention of it. I close my eyes for a moment, and I think of what my old hometown means to me. Max, again under the ice. The girl in the pink raincoat standing out there in the darkness watching me as I did nothing. My heart is racing. I came to Night's Fall to get away from that town, but I can feel the dread somewhere behind my eyes like a migraine. Something is trying to pull me back there. Fate, perhaps, or a curse. They are indistinguishable when you end up in the same place. Okay, I'll look into it, is all I can say. I keep my darkest thoughts from Debbie and Jim. No reason to make things worse. Yet worse is on the horizon. I'm going back to Wyndham, and my blood runs cold at the thought.
As the sun settles down, we are lost with no lights on, to the place where we drown, beneath the horizon, for war.